Ooh, sacrilegious. Because, man, this was my thing, not this thing. Yeah, the Hannah Montana edition of the PSP is the only one I had in box, so, oops. This is something I just want to talk about because ever since I was a kid, I have always thought the PSP was like the coolest looking thing ever. But unfortunately, I never owned one. Hell, I never really had much of a chance to play one for years. It wasn't until my adult phase of the whole evolutionary process that I actually got my hands on a PSP for an extended period of time and actually owned one. But man, I was always looking at it from afar. And this hit at a time when a lot of these portable media devices were really hitting it big and doing a lot of crazy stuff. Really impressive video games and graphics, and oh man, they could all play music and videos and all this cool stuff. Keep in mind, like, a couple of years prior to this, I mean, like, the best we had was, like, Game Boy Advance, N-Gage, and even then, the N-Gage had some really impressive graphics for the time. I mean, that thing was a cell phone video game console combo pack. And in terms of games, it could do PS1 quality stuff on the go back in the early to mid-2000s. Like, that was insane. That's just the thing, man. I mean, I feel like childhood gaming experiences are often defined by handhelds. You know, handhelds are often seen as the thing for kids. They gotta do something in the backseat of that car during a road trip, so hey, throw them a Game Boy Color. Who gives a shit? And yeah, some of those experiences are some of my favorite video game memories of all time. Game Boy games, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance games will always hold an incredibly special place in my heart. But the thing with those handheld games is they were always kind of chasing a home console type experience, and they can never quite get there because obviously handhelds are far less powerful than a home console. But every time those Game Boy Advance games would kind of nudge themselves into the direction of a home console game, it was always incredibly impressive and it was super exciting. I know, one of the coolest things about the Nintendo DS to me was the fact that the DS could have 3D graphics and it could also play video pretty consistently. The launch title of that thing being Super Mario 64 DS, mind-blowing. I mean, I didn't even know that game was a thing until like 2009, 2010 or something. I remember seeing it getting played on the bus and I was like, oh my god, that's fucking Mario 64 on the DS? What? And then a lot of games on the DS could play like actual full motion video and it looked damn good. Sure, the Game Boy Advance could do that sometimes, especially with something like Game Boy Advance video cartridges, but nobody likes that. Now the DS, I remember getting Mario vs. Donkey Kong 2 on the DS for Christmas one year, and like one of the first things that you see in the game is this full motion video cutscene playing across the two screens, and it looked incredible. It looked like something I would see on the GameCube or Wii. Like, oh my gosh. So I think you can already tell, if that was impressive to me as a kid, the PSP was mind-blowing. Definitely made sense for Sony to get into the portable market. I mean, the PlayStation brand took over the damn world. I mean, PlayStation 1 and 2 were two home runs, one after another, each the best-selling console of their respective generations. However, Nintendo dominated the handheld market, which was a huge market, so I think Sony thought like, well, yeah, two can play at this game. They announced the PlayStation Portable, and it released here in North America in March of 2005. It was $250 too at launch, which obviously was a bit more pricey than something like the Nintendo DS, which I believe launched at $150. But I mean, for $100 more, you are getting quite a lot more packed into this hardware-wise. The PSP was often marketed as a PlayStation 2 for your pocket, and you know, looking back at it retrospectively, yeah, that was half true, I'd say. Definitely isn't as powerful as a PlayStation 2. Sure, a lot of PS2 games were ported to the PSP, but to be honest, like, you kind of have to dig into the library a bit more to really understand, like, what the hell was going on with the PSP. Because, yeah, it felt like it pretty much could do everything you wanted to ask it to do, but everything was always, like, slightly gimped in some way. So, is it truly a PlayStation 2 for your pocket? Yeah, kinda. Many of the games that released on the PSP looked and felt like PS2 quality experiences. This one right here is one of the easiest ones to point to. Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories, a fully 3D open world GTA game set in Liberty City on the go. This is basically the PSP's Grand Theft Auto 3. How cool is that? That is incredible. But here's the thing, looking back at a lot of these things on the PSP, yes, Liberty City Stories is like the PSP's Grand Theft Auto 3. It isn't Grand Theft Auto 3, though. A lot of these PSP versions of games kind of initially looked and sounded the part, but in the end, they are definitely kind of B-grade versions of their home console brothers. Many of these are still fine games. A lot of them are pretty good, but they definitely feel like skippable entries. Like, you can be the biggest Grand Theft Auto fan on the planet, and I wouldn't blame you if you skipped Liberty City Stories or Vice City Stories, the follow-up to this. See, I feel like the PSP has this initial wow factor. And yeah, it's really cool that you have an exclusive Grand Theft Auto game, even though this and Vice City Stories eventually came to PS2. But I think a lot of the experiences the PSP was really pushing didn't make for the greatest, like, handheld experiences. You know, that's what the DS really excelled at. You know, pick up and play, really fun in short bursts or long bursts if you really want to, just games to play. And the PSP, a lot of these just kind of felt like you'd rather play them on a PS2. It's really cool to play them on a handheld, but, you know, eventually you kind of go, it's just like, all right, you know, I kind of wish I was just playing this on a TV. Definitely didn't help we had this control layout, so, I mean, you know, let's give it some credit. The amount of inputs that the PSP had was definitely far and above the competition, i.e., you had one analog stick. And this nub is fine. It does the job, but I've always found it to be a little uncomfortable, a little slippery. And the thing is, you go to all the trouble to include one, yet you don't include another. That was a big selling point of the PlayStation Vita, just the fact that, oh, now we have two analog sticks. Because fundamentally, if you're trying to be a PlayStation 2 on the go, you kind of end up being a bit of a crappy PS2 to go, considering any of the games that you'd want to play on this that would be like PS2 quality games often required, you know, camera control. So a lot of times you got to use like the shoulder buttons, or if you're playing like a first-person shooter on the PSP, you end up having to use like the face buttons to like aim around. It's just weird. Definitely makes the PSP feel a bit like a jack of all trades, master of none, because it does a lot of other really cool stuff, but it just kind of feels like it's a little half-baked. Maybe not half-baked, but more so just the limitations of the PSP or just handheld devices at the time in general kind of made it so then like, oh yeah, it's great that you could do that with the PSP, but I almost feel like it kind of made the PSP kind of like a really cool device that you just didn't really want to play for an extended period of time. And hey, keep in mind, this is me kind of speculating about all of this, but a lot of the people that I've talked to that own PSPs said like, yeah, I thought the PSP was cool. I played it for a little bit, and then I didn't really touch it for a while. And looking at the sales numbers, like, it did very well, but it did about half as well as the Nintendo DS. And of course, like, that's still incredibly well. The DS became one of the best-selling consoles of all time. However, I think it's interesting to kind of speculate why the PSP just didn't have as much success as the DS and didn't really have as long-lasting of an appeal as the DS did. But man, I didn't know any of that as a kid. I just thought this was cool as hell. I mean, sure, a game like Liberty City Stories is not technically Grand Theft Auto 3, but it's close enough. However, you did get straight-up PS2 games on the PSP. Now, I feel like the most consistent examples of PS2 games playable on PSP happen to be a lot of more like the licensed games. Just because a lot of those were like the big multi-platform releases, they came out on like all the consoles, so I think they had a much better chance of getting like, oh yeah, well, let's just port the PS2 game to the PSP. So Lego Star Wars 2 right here, this is in fact the entirety of Lego Star Wars 2. It is the PS2 game on the go, which is incredibly impressive, especially considering the fact the DS version of this game is hot fucking garbage. It is glitchy as hell. It doesn't work. But this right here, this is the full game, and it plays great on the PSP. It's pretty unfortunate that Lego Star Wars The Complete Saga didn't get a PSP version, but hey, at the very least, the original trilogy got that, which is, you know, I'll take it. The Simpsons game, this is a multi-platform release that I followed a lot as a kid, just because it was a very compelling licensed game. I really enjoyed The Simpsons back in the day, and this just seemed like a very high-quality tie-in game with a very compelling art style. You know, it was all cel-shaded and everything, and it turned out okay. It's a solid game, but it came out on basically every console at the time. You know, the primary console that it came out on was the Xbox 360 and PS3, but it did get PS2 and Wii versions, and that version of the game is more or less the same as the HD counterparts. There's a couple of differences, you know, they had to downgrade a couple of things or change out a couple of elements here or there, but the PSP version is basically one-to-one with the PS2 and Wii versions for all extents and purposes, which was pretty cool compared to the DS version of the game, which again was a completely original game. It was a 2D platformer. But hell, I think it's even cool that we got something like the Sega Genesis collection from PS2 on PSP. You look at the types of retro game compilations we were getting on Game Boy Advance or Nintendo DS, and they pale in comparison to this. I mean, this has so many games included, 28 games, and it's all fairly one-to-one with the PS2 collection. You compare that to even the Nintendo DS, where that had the Sonic Classic Collection, which only includes like a couple of Sonic games. This one, man, you have Sonic 1 and 2 included. Sonic Classic Collection on the DS has that, and then Sonic 3 and Knuckles. There you go. That collection has 2 games, this one doesn't. Albeit, you know, keep in mind Sonic 3 and Knuckles is a very good game, so, you know, okay, that has some value there, but, and this one has 26 games that DS collection doesn't have, so, yeah, the PSP kind of wins out fairly well there. And like I said, you know, we also have Thrillville, which, you know, it definitely appeals a bit more to the kids at the time, but hey, I mean, like, this was a PS2 Xbox game, and, you know, you could play it on the PSP, you know, pretty much, you know, the console experience on the go. I just think that's neat as hell. I mean, like, you were playing the home console games on a handheld of the time, you know, like pretty much the full console experience on the go. Sure, you may have had some compromises here or there, but for the most part, a lot of these PS2, PSP ports were actually pretty damn solid. It was mostly came down to the fact that, like, yeah, playing on the PSP, it's not the most, like, comfortable experience compared to playing with a controller on a big TV. You also have the problem of, like, hey, moving around, you know, the PSP uses discs. So, if you move around a little too much, yeah, your game can skip or freeze or anything like that, but still really damn impressive. Hell, even to this day, like, I find myself very impressed by the PSP, just what can play on it, and just seeing these PS2 games running on something in the palm of my hands of its era. Like, that's impressive. Like, obviously with stuff like, you know, the Nintendo Switch, Switch 2, Steam Deck, all of that stuff, you know, like, obviously, it's not as impressive to have, like, a game from that era in the palm of your hands. Hell, I mean, like, there's PS5 games that made their way onto the Switch 2 that I'm like, oh yeah, that's really impressive. I'm playing this portably. However, the PSP still amazes me sometimes with what can play on it. And it's specifically because this thing released in 2005. Yes, the concept of a Grand Theft Auto game playing on a handheld is not shocking to me anymore, but the fact that it's playable on a handheld from this year is what's shocking and what's so cool about playing a PSP these days. I mean, buddy, there's all kinds of games that it's just like, what, this got a PSP version? These are both PS3 and 360 games, yet they got PSP ports. Dante's Inferno and Tekken 6. What? I think I remember seeing both of these in a game store one day, and I never knew they got PSP versions. Now, of course, like, them being Xbox 360 and PS3 games, yeah, the PSP versions are obvious downgrades, but, you know, playing on such a smaller screen, and just having, like, portable versions of these games at all is super cool. I do think it's funny, though, because they actually re-released Tekken 6 on the PS5 via their PlayStation Plus Classics catalog, and it got just downvoted to smithereens because I don't think a lot of people realize that it was the PSP port of the game that got re-released, not the PS3 one, which is just kind of funny. But I think it's still cool that they re-released this one just because, like, what a wacky little port. What a wacky thing that happened that just doesn't really get talked about all too much. But see, with how impressive a lot of these ports were to the PSP, it's almost a double-edged sword because that made a lot of the lackluster game releases on this thing just feel that much more just underwhelming. I don't know. I mean, to many developers and publishers, the PSP was another handheld. So you'll often see Nintendo DS games get multi-platform releases on the PSP, which is perfectly fine, but it does kind of feel like those games don't belong on here, you know? Stuff that just doesn't really fit, like, what the PSP was trying to, like, be. Frogger Helmet Chaos was a Nintendo DS game. Then you had stuff like Go Sudoku, and then the Napoleon Dynamite game, which also released only on DS, so this was a DS and PSP game. okay. My Spanish coach? Like, what the hell is this doing on PSP? And then we have Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars, which was initially released as a Nintendo DS exclusive. And, you know, it made sense on that platform, and it was kind of a cool return to form for GTA, being the first top-down Grand Theft Auto in quite a long time. And they did a lot of things with this game on the DS that took advantage of the DS's unique features, you know, the dual screen, touch screens, all of that stuff. So when it came to PSP, you know, it kind of felt like, you know, okay, that's all fine and good, because, you know, this is probably actually the definitive version of the game. You know, they added a lot of features, and, you know, it does look better, and it's also in widescreen now. But this just feels like it's like, but the PSP already had like 2 exclusive Grand Theft Autos that were in fully 3D, and, you know, now you're porting a DS game to it, and it's just like, that's all good, you know, that's more content for the PSP, and it does run and look better on here, but it's also like, this doesn't feel like a PSP game. Eventually, some studios kind of gave up on giving the PSP like home console type experiences. Here we have Lego Harry Potter years 5 through 7, but this started with Lego Indiana Jones 2 on the PSP, because every Lego game after that hit the PSP, they were upgraded ports of the DS versions of these Lego games. So they ran and looked better than the DS games, but they were still the DS games at their core. Like, they were different experiences from the home console games. And all this kind of nonsense started at launch. We have Spider-Man 2 on the PSP. Spider-Man 2 on home consoles on PS2 is often considered one of the best movie tie-in games, at least from that generation. So, oh man, you have Spider-Man 2 on the PSP. This is gonna be so cool. This is not the same game whatsoever. In fact, this is actually kind of a crappy game. From my experience playing these older games, Spider-Man 1 on PS2 was a much more limited in scope experience. You know, Spider-Man 2 just broadened things out, giving you a whole open world New York with really fun web-slinging controls and all of that. Spider-Man 1's web-slinging controls feel really clunky, and they kind of just feel like, oh, this is your method of getting from this building to this building. There wasn't really much like physics involved with it. It was just kind of like a weird movement kind of thing. And it wasn't an open world. It was much more like level by level kind of thing. So imagine that, but based on the Spider-Man 2 movie. So Spider-Man 2 on PSP is more of like a follow-up to the Spider-Man 1 game on PS2. It's fucking confusing. But yeah, this is its own game. It's not Spider-Man 2 PS2. And you know what? If I had the PSP back in the day, I think I would be a little disappointed by some of that. But honestly, looking back at it, you know, it kind of makes the PSP that much more interesting as a handheld and as a game library. Like, it's just interesting to look back at and just see, you know, oh, what was a genuine home console port? What was a DS port? What was a completely unique version that only the PSP got? And I think that stuff is super interesting. And for the most part, I feel like a lot of the games that the PSP got were kind of that Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories level of experience. You know, let's take a game series that is well known for its home console stuff on PlayStation 2 and whatnot, and let's give it a PSP version. You know, it's going to be a little more smaller in scope, maybe a little more limited, but overall, you know, it's still going to give the vibe of a PS2 game. So much so that a lot of these PSP exclusive games eventually got PS2 versions, much like what happened with Ratchet & Clank Size Matters here, which a lot of these games, they're fine. Definitely solid games, but a lot of these just were more so like, oh yeah, you know, the PSP gets Little Big Planet, but you know, like Little Big Planet on PSP isn't like this, oh my god, it's the next Little Big Planet. Like, to be fair, I don't know what the fuck this is. Like, they still call it Little Big Planet, but it is kind of its own game. Like, it's Little Big Planet on PSP. It is different from Little Big Planet on PS3, but, you know, whatever. I mean, it's cool that these experiences made it to PSP, even if they, you know, weren't the same. Like God of War Chains of Olympus, they did prequels to God of War on PSP, and these are solid games. But as we can see here, it wasn't made by Sony Santa Monica Studios, which were the lead developer of the God of War games. They were developed by Ready at Dawn. But still, you get a home console comparable experience on the go, and many times it would be like a unique experience, which, you know, has its pros, has its cons, like I already said, but looking back at this retrospectively, I think these are just, it's just cool to see this stuff. Because the PSP game library is all over the goddamn place. For some reason, they do this thing on PSP, okay? I don't understand why they just name a lot of games the basic title of the franchise or just something super generic. We already saw it with Little Big Planet. Gran Turismo on PSP, it's just called Gran Turismo. Mon Nation Racers, it's just Mon Nation Racers. Tiger Woods PGA Tour, it's just Tiger Woods PGA Tour. And this is NBA 07 because I don't have the original game that I believe was a launch title for the PSP. It was just called NBA. But man, as weird as a lot of this stuff might have been, like in the moment, like if you had this system when it was new, you know, like just buying the games now and just getting into the PSP more, it's just like, I love this fucking library. Yeah, I can criticize it, but it's also like, it's just so interesting. I never know what I'm gonna get with the PSP, and there's all kinds of things that I'm like, wow, that existed? But right here is possibly why I thought the PSP was as cool as it was back then. I mean, like, just the fact that it was like a home console quality handheld was enough to pique my interest. But then you add these UMD movies to the mix. What? So I was a portable DVD player kid. I had one primarily because, you know, my extended family lived about an hour or so away from where me and my parents lived. So every weekend there would be a little bit of traveling involved. So, you know, probably sometime in the mid 2000s, I got a portable DVD player for Christmas, and that was great. And, you know, over the next couple of years, you know, like as I would wear that one out, because I definitely did, you know, I'd get like a, you know, a new model or a different one. And I definitely wore out a lot of the DVDs in my childhood collection on portable DVD players. But of course, you know, like a portable DVD player, it's about the size of a laptop, maybe a little smaller. So, you know, while it is portable, you know, definitely could be a little more portable, especially if I wanted to take it into like maybe like a restaurant or something like that. And man, a PSP is damn portable. You can fit this thing in your pocket and you can play DVD movies on it. Okay, well, you know, put an fat little asterisk at the end of DVD movies, because UMD videos are definitely comparable to DVDs in terms of quality, but you know, they definitely can't hold as much as a DVD. They're tinier. Logistically, these don't make a ton of sense. I mean, by 2005, you know, iPods were already starting to be able to play video. 2 years later, the iPhone would hit the scene, and that had, you know, like this big widescreen touchscreen. You could watch a movie on it, and it was all digital, and digital just makes sense for something like this. Yes, it's great that you can fit this in your pocket, but when it comes to like, oh, you want to watch a movie on the go, what, you have to load up the disc here? Gotta get that locked and loaded in your system before you start traveling. But then what if you want to bring another movie? Because keep in mind, these can't hold a ton. This is season 1 of SpongeBob. I'm sorry, season 1, volume 1. See, the official DVD release is the complete first season, but this one only has like 10 episodes. And even then, each of these 10 episodes, these are like the 11-minute segments, sometimes even less. So overall, there's 109 minutes of content on here with no bonus features, which, hey, at least some of the UMD movies came packed with a couple of bonus features here and there. But overall, UMD videos, as cool as they were, it's like, oh my God, DVDs, but even more portable. I mean, you could just put videos on your PSP digitally. So you could rip your DVD copy of Kill Bill to your computer and then transfer that over to your PSP. It's definitely a little more complicated doing it that way, but it was definitely far less expensive than shelling out the same price for a DVD movie to get this movie on PSP in lower quality with less bonus features, and it can only be played on a PSP. Overall, I feel like the impact of UMD movies boils down to it really did showcase how the PSP was like this ultimate portable device. Like, oh man, we have DVD movies you can play on the PSP with tiny ass discs. Like, that was cool. Hell, I think it's still cool. I own so many UMD videos. Obviously, like, what's the point of owning these? Because, like, you know, what's the point? But I just think it's really cool to see what movies released on this format, because it does feel like the UMD video format got a good widespread of like most general franchises and companies that release movies that you'd expect to see. Like, for example, you had a couple of Disney releases on UMD video. Not a ton, but they were there. You had Pirates of the Caribbean, you had Toy Story, you had The Incredibles. I mean, that was sort of it, but hey, it was something. There was pretty much a little something for everybody on UMD Video, though I will definitely say most of the biggest releases feel like they kind of boil down to you're a 20-year-old guy and you want to chuckle at a PG-13 Adam Sandler movie on the go. That's what most of the most popular UMD movies kind of boil down to. But I'd say part of the reason UMD Video failed is because the PSP was still pretty damn good at just being a digital media device. You could store videos on here and watch videos. You could listen to music, view photos. I think the fact that the user interface of the PSP is the same as the PS3's with the cross media bar, that just really hits it home how much you can do on the PSP. Now, I think the unfortunate thing is, while the PSP could do all of this, I do think devices like the iPod and the iPhone ended up just completely eating the PSP's lunch. Because that's what I eventually got. I got an iPod Nano in 2008. And that was like, you know, like, oh my gosh, like I can do all this on such a thin portable device. You know, I could watch movies, watch TV shows, listen to music. I could store a bunch of photos on there. I could play some simple click wheel iPod games. And yeah, that was impressive. But I think it was definitely more impressive that the PSP was doing this years prior. But of course, even though the PSP could do all of this stuff, I do think, you know, the eventual implementation in it in future devices was definitely a little less clunky on devices that were definitely a little bit more portable, and you didn't have to deal with a damn spinning disk drive in them. Because yeah, it's cool that the PSP has a tiny disk drive. Like, it's just like, damn, this really is a PS2 to go. But then you look at the PS Vita and they got rid of the disk drive, which shows you, yeah, that was not a great idea. But overall, man, like, I wanted one of these things so badly as a kid. You know, the fact that you could play all these incredible home console quality games, you could watch movies, you could do all of this cool media stuff on it. And that's not even scratching the surface. The PSP could do so much. And it's a shame that I didn't really get to experience it until years later. I mean, like, only within the past decade or so. But you know what? I think I appreciate it even more now than I would have back then if I owned it as a kid. Because like I said, like, what I mainly saw a lot of people do back then is they would get a PSP and they would, you know, really like it, but then they would throw it in the fucking drawer. And I think now I've just been having such a great time going through the PSP library and just discovering what weird shit is on this thing. There are some incredible exclusives on the PSP, but then you have weird things. You have things that you never even heard of on the platform. You have home console ports. You have versions of games that are made specifically for the PSP that kind of look like the home console version, but no, they're a completely original game on the PSP. And then you have PSP exclusives. You have PSP versions of home console franchises, like a lot of the Sony stuff, you know, the God of War games on PSP, Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter. Sure, a lot of these may not have been as good as the home console games, but it's really cool to see these franchises with original games on the PSP. And then even seeing the games that were multiplats with the Nintendo DS. Yeah, I think that's weird, but looking back at it all, I'm like, this is so interesting. Like, come on, you think that too, right? And then collecting all the UMD movies and just seeing them on the PSP. Obviously, a lot of this is definitely more of a novelty these days. Obviously, handheld devices after the PSP have definitely overshadowed this handheld. Like I said, you know, like a Switch 2 can run stuff that runs on like a PS5. But the fact that the PSP was doing all of this in 2005, I think makes this one of the coolest damn handhelds or video game things in general to take a look at these days. Just travel back in time and step foot back in the PSP's era, and I think you will be just as impressed as I am. I wanted a PSP so badly as a kid, but you know what? I'm almost happy I didn't have one. I made a lot of great memories out of my Nintendo DS systems. And I almost feel like I wouldn't have appreciated the PSP as much as I do these days. I think I'd only focus on the gimmicks that I thought were so cool about the PSP. I'd only be like, oh my god, I can play a movie on here. Oh my god, I have a home console game. But then I wouldn't really actually dive deep and really appreciate the amazing games and the amazing features that the PSP had. This is honestly one of my favorite consoles to look into these days and just like enjoy, just experience, because I didn't experience it as a kid. So it's almost like this is like a brand new thing for me sometimes. It is so damn cool, and I am so happy. I am living out my wildest childhood fantasy. Fuck yes.